Hi there, and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. I'm excited to welcome Marina Yanay-Triner to the podcast. Marina is a transformational and compassionate somatic coach with 10 years of experience in dialogue group facilitation, working with Israeli and Palestinian conflict transformation through dialogue. She also worked at the Jerusalem Rape Crisis Center, where she facilitated dialogue on gender, sexuality, and sexual assault. In addition, she also worked as a health coach, helping women transform their health and relationship with food. Marina engages with her clients in a compassionate awareness of their trauma, how it has led them through their life and their circumstances, and what is standing in the way of them experiencing complete joy. She draws on somatic, body-based practices, inner child work, breath work, somatic meditation, and more. In this episode, we explore Marina's trauma recovery journey, and we tackle the topic of how to journey through suffering using somatic healing as an intervention. I enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure you will too. As always, thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of the episode. Also, please support my upcoming book, Trauma Propels, Turning Obstacles into Opportunities, by heading to my pre-sale campaign page, linked in the show notes. So stay tuned, and as always, keep listening. So hi, Marina. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's 6 a.m., but I love 6 a.m., so it's all good. Plus, I've been waking up for sunrise for the past 3 days.
Yes.
So it flows.
I think that's the best. If you start your day with a sunrise, that's the best way.
Yeah, and then it makes you also feel like the day is so long and you've done so much, and it's kind of cool.
So again, welcome. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is your profession. You are a compassionate somatic coach that help your clients to really work through their trauma. So I know that we're going to dive into what all that means and what it is that you do for your clients. But do you want to, I know that you're a fellow survivor, and do you want to share some of your story with the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So for a really long time, I very much focused on one trauma, and there are many more that I discovered along the way. I was actually talking to a client recently, and she was like, we were doing inner child work, and she's like, what age do you go to? Because my trauma is from my 20s. And I'm like, you gotta, you dig deeper, because whatever happened in your 20s is so much based on way before that. And then she realized it in the process. So for a long time, I focused on something that happened when I was 15, which is I was dating someone who was 3 years older. We actually started dating when I was 14, and it ended up being an abusive relationship, sexually and emotionally. So that was very traumatic for me. It took me many years to work through that, and I still do, in many ways, especially the sexual part of it. And I would say all the parts, like the emotional as well. And thankfully, he had to leave the country, and that was really great. And I did end up actually going to the police then in that other country and reporting him, although I tried to use restorative justice. But restorative justice is not they don't force him, he has to choose it. What's the word? Whatever, you get what I'm saying. Yeah. So he ended up declining, and I was coming up to the end of the time that I could do something about it through the justice system. So I was like, okay, I really want his name to be written somewhere, in case another woman comes through, or even young girl, or whatever it may be. So I ended up going to the police, and I ended up, this was in Israel, and they actually ask you if you want to have a face-off, which is you and the person sitting in this tiny office, and basically sharing like your sides of the story. And that's actually what I wanted, which can sound weird. Like some people are like, oh my God, no. And it was so hard, probably like the hardest thing I've ever done. It was tiny, this room, and it was me and him and 3 male detectors. Yeah. And so it was super, super hard and scary, but I also really wanted to kind of get a sense of empowerment for myself in front of him, because for years I was so silent and, going along with what he wanted. So I really, really wanted to speak up. And it was actually really interesting because in the investigation part, I actually worked for the rape crisis centers at that time. And my coworker, who was a lawyer, big time lawyer in Israel, who was like, she was changing laws in Israel, which was so cool for this topic. She actually came with me and she was in there with me for 3 hours of the investigation. Not because it was awful, but because I had so much to say. Like I talked for 3 hours straight. I actually had an amazing investigator. They brought in a woman. She was young, because this police station literally did not have women. It's crazy. It was all men. So
Wow.
Imagine that. If it was a man, I think it would be very, very hard for me at that time. I think now it has changed a lot, but back then I was like, oh God. But there is a law. Some people don't know about it. I don't know if it exists here in the US, but in Israel, there's a law where you can request a woman if you want. So it was actually great. Like it was a great experience. It's so interesting because, I worked for the rape crisis centers and I always told everyone like I was raped, I was sexually assaulted. And I talked for 3 hours and my coworker was like, why do you call it that? Because to me, it sounds also like emotional abuse. And I was like, what? Oh,
I have more trauma.
Yeah. I didn't realize that, because she was just listening to me like go on and on about all the things, all the gaslighting, just all the things that he would do. And that really opened my eyes. So for me, like that whole experience, it was super hard. The reporting was super hard because literally I waited for a month for them to call me, and it could be any moment. And it was so hard to just like wait for that phone call,
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the hardest month of my life, I would say. Like I barely functioned. I had trouble like showering, brushing my teeth, like just getting up from bed. It was really, really hard. But it was so relieving. Like when I got there and I talked, and I was like, I actually recorded it for myself, just what I said, because he kind of played like victim and poor thing and was just like, why are you doing this to me? And I was like, no, I'm going to talk now and you're going to be quiet. Literally,
Yes.
banged on the table.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know. It was like, whoa. It was actually really funny because right before that, I was in another room and there was this investigator there just like doing his thing, but I was just waiting and I was freaking out. And my partner and his mom were there with me. And then my partner told me that investigator just like walked by the room and heard me. And he told my partner and his mom, don't worry, she's like a total badass in there.
She's standing up for herself.
Yes, she's throwing it down.
Yeah, enough.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was really, and it was like, I remember feeling like high after that. Like I just felt like this relief. It was amazing. So, that's a big trauma that definitely, it's pretty cool now that I'm talking about it right now in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I feel really good.
Yes.
It's weird because it's, when you talk about your trauma, like it takes a lot of time to get to the point where you're not triggered, and I feel really good. I'll let you know in 2 hours, but yeah. But I feel really good. I do. It's really amazing. But anyway, besides that, other things is, the emotional piece, how I said that I didn't realize I was emotionally abused. I think that's because I really didn't grow up with emotions being allowed. Like obviously I had emotions, but my parents just did not have tools for emotions. And it's so important for me to share because most people don't know that your emotions can be neglected by your parents, and that really can be a trauma. And I just for years was like, I'm so curious what allowed this relationship to happen, because I'm close with my parents. They love me. They always like took care of me. I was so important to them. Like they didn't neglect me in any way in my mind. And I was like, I don't understand, what allowed this to happen. It's like when you find out this kid is like doing drugs and you're like, but they came from such a good home.
Yes. What sparked this? Where did it come from?
Exactly. And I was so curious. And so now I understand that there was just no place for emotion in my home at all. Wow. And when I was sad, my mom would just be like, stop being sad, because she couldn't handle seeing me sad. She really struggled with that. And also because both my parents have a lot of trauma that they never processed. So they just don't, as soon as we get into the body, which I know we're going to talk about. Yeah. That's where the emotion is, right? And that's where the trauma is. So this is a theory, right? But my theory is that they don't want it. They feel like they can't handle it. They don't have the tools, which I felt for so long. So I totally get it. And so that was a big trauma, because now when I see like families where a kid is crying and the parents are like, oh, it's okay, come here. I'm like, wow, my whole body craves this. Like, I never got that. It was always like, we have to go, we have to move, like, let's go. And even when I was going through that story, it was like that as well. It's like that. Like it didn't click for them. It didn't click for me either. I was so young. I didn't understand what was happening, but it didn't click for them what I was really going through. So I think that's also part of being born in a communist country, my parents in Ukraine, and moving basically as refugees because they left everything and they ran. In 1990, they left Ukraine and they went to Israel, and actually recently found out they were just on the street with nowhere to go. Like they were just standing there. And my mom said, I just kept screaming, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home, just nonstop. And I'm sure, even though I was 2 years old, I have no doubt, that's a trauma. Yeah. And then we also moved again. That's why I hate moving. I'm like, don't move me. I'm staying right here. But as soon as I move, I adapt so well and I just want to stay. It's so funny, but it makes so much sense because we're so adaptable. Like our family's so adaptable because we've had to do it. So then we moved from Israel when, all the terrorist attacks were going on and it was just like really hard. And my parents were freaked out and they didn't want me to go to the military, all these things. So we moved again when I was 13 to the United States. Yes. And then I moved back to Israel and moved back here again. So there was a lot of moving. There's a lot of moving. And then the last piece I'll throw, and I'm sharing this because I feel like it sparks things for people. Like when I hear people share these things, I'm like, oh, me too, but I never realized, Yes. So when my grandma was 2, her mother died. And she died a day after the labor camp in the Holocaust that my grandma was basically, she wasn't born there, but she, pretty much was born in a labor camp. It was liberated. And a day later, her mom died. And so that's just like a big, big, big story that my grandma always carried. It was always like, I'm alone. No one loves me because I don't have a mom. Her dad remarried, but it wasn't the same. And her stepmom burned all the photos. So my grandma doesn't remember her mom. And I find myself often saying, I'm alone, nobody loves me. And then I'm like, what? No, that's not my story at all. Yes. My parents, I had 6 adults actually obsessed with me. Yes. But the story is actually generational. It's generational trauma.
Generational trauma is so interesting because, we carry things from, like you say, your grandmother that had experienced it, but you feel it. And you're wondering to yourself, but how is it possible? Because this can't be, it never happened in my life. I shouldn't be feeling this way. And it's almost like, the body remembers.
The body does remember. And if you're curious about this topic, I think I told you actually last time we chatted. Yeah. It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. That book will blow your mind. It's so incredible. And I feel like every time this these different traumas come up from my grandma that I really picked up hardcore from my mom's mom. When I have that awareness, like, oh, this is not mine. It's so freeing and liberating. And there's like rituals in that book and different things that he suggests. And also a lot of science, which is so cool.
Yes.
How, your mom was born with the egg that is going to make you. It was already in her. So, and she got that from her mom. So then you see like that DNA gets actually carried over. So it's really, really cool.
Yeah. And I mean, breaking generational trauma, it takes a lot. I recently spoke to my dad, actually, and he was telling me about how he broke generational trauma. And I was astounded at his story. And I was so proud of him.
Yeah, it's a cycle. It's definitely, I know, especially around money, for example, I know it's been there forever because I just see the reaction, even from my mom. When my mom, and she told me, I think helped her be aware that even when she realizes she could have paid $1 less on something, the look on her face, it's just so instinctual that it's like, okay, you're fine. Like, you will live without $1. You are not starving. But her body feels like that. And my grandma starved,
Yeah.
So it got passed down. And it is so hard because it becomes like an instinct. It's not something you think about. It's in the body. It's not in your mind. It's not a conscious decision. It's not like my mom was like, oh yes, I actually have a car and a house and I'm fine. Why am I doing this? Right? It's just like, it's like an instinct reaction.
Yes.
That's where, when you go into the body, all the healing starts, because that is actually what they call the subconscious. That's where it lives.
So, I mean, that's a good place to start, because I think that when you're saying that it's a reaction, a lot of that comes from the subconscious mind. So when you started to do your healing work, where did you start?
Yeah. So I journaled a lot, actually. And now it's funny because I kind of have a weird relationship with journaling, because it was such a deep healing thing for me. And whenever I would journal when I was a teenager, it was really hard stuff, So now I'm just like, I don't know if I want to go there, but I do still journal a little bit. So I did journal, and it was actually very healing. When I was 18 and I started college, there was free therapy, and I was like, please help. So I went. And I'm so grateful to that therapist, because in the very first session, one of the first things she told me was, this journey is about you connecting back to your intuition.
Wow. That's awesome.
And it's so true. And I still get goosebumps.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true, because when you're abused in any way, it's like you forget that you are the one that knows the truth, and you don't need it from anyone else. And so you start just constantly looking for truth elsewhere. So it's still a journey. Like, I'm still reminding myself, oh, I don't need the answer. Like, I have the answer. Maybe another person can reflect the answer to me or help me get to my own answer, but it's always mine. So she was wonderful. I actually recently emailed her, thank you again, because I'm so grateful to her. So that's kind of how it started. And I started going into kind of the self-development world, where everything is about the mind. So it's like the mind, think positive thoughts, motivation, affirmations, all these different things. And it didn't really work. And I hear this from so many people that I work with now, is that they're so interested in personal development, but and I'm not saying it doesn't ever work. It does work for some people. And it's interesting, because now that I've actually gone into the body, the affirmations, the manifestation, all these things are working now.
Yes.
Which is really cool. So you mentioned the conscious and the subconscious. There's also the unconscious, which is the part of us that it's like, I like to see it as an iceberg, where the iceberg is like your conscious, and then right below the surface, there's the subconscious, which is easier to access. And then underneath all of it is unconscious. And the subconscious and even the unconscious drives so much of what we do. So if you have this really, really, really strong belief ingrained in you that I'm going to take one of mine that used to exist. No matter what I do, I can't make money. No matter what I do.
Right.
And it was
Yes.
so strong. And if I say affirmations, if I say I can make money or, whatever, it's not going to work.
No, it won't work.
No.
It won't.
No.
Affirmations alone don't work. Yeah.
It was so frustrating because I was committed. I was very committed. I'm a very committed person. And I went on and I did, did the work, whatever.
Yes.
Journal, like all the things that were suggested. And then I started to get like business coaching because I had a nutrition coaching business. And I also started to get really curious about why my clients in nutrition who like know everything, like they know I'm telling them what to do. They know what to do, but they don't do it.
Yes.
It's like, is something wrong with them? Like, what's going on? And these were wonderful people. So I was like, no, like clearly nothing's wrong with them. So I need to figure this out. Like I need to figure out the behavior piece because I'm always so into the deeper thing, like not just change your behavior. And I started to realize that you can't just tell a person, stop smoking, stop drinking, or exercise.
Yeah.
They tell themselves. They don't need me for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit of accountability, which is nice, but it's like, okay. And also when I leave, like, what are they going to do once the accountability is over?
Yeah.
So I was like, I really want to know, like, what's underneath everything, like what's driving these things.
Yeah.
And so when I started to get business coaching, one of the coaches used to be a somatic therapist.
Yes. So now you can tell us what a somatic therapist or a somatic coach does.
Yes, I can. Somatic means pertaining to the body. That's it.
Right.
So it can be different things pertaining to the body. And it's as simple as that. And she basically was like, she saw me so stuck. And she was like, I just want you to sit and feel the stuckness and just be with it and just do nothing. And I was like, what?
Right.
Excuse me. Feel and do nothing. Feel and do nothing.
And that's hard for you, growing up where you were taught that we suppress our emotions. We do not feel anything. So in that moment, I mean, you must have been so confused.
I was so confused. And I was like, I need to do stuff so that stuff happens because I need to make it happen.
Yeah.
And my family was very much like that. There was so much chaos and urgency. And I love telling my clients the word urgency, because when urgency comes in, that is our trauma response kicking in, because almost nothing is urgent when you think about it. What's urgent? Trauma. When you're about to be killed or when, a lion is chasing you, that is urgent. Anything else is not urgent. So trauma is urgent. And when we feel that urgency, which, by the way, I used to feel 99% of the time of my life, I used to feel urgency. Like that was my life. And that is a big marker of trauma response.
Right. So is this similar to sort of like the fight and flight mode?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you think about it again, when something overwhelming happens, when something really scary, I'll just start with something really scary happens to us, we have two choices: to fight or to flee. And the third one is I can't do either because my brain tells me I can't, because this person's aiming a gun at me. So I can't run and I can't punch this person. This person's gone away because they're going to kill me. So what do? That's the third, is freeze. So we freeze. Yeah. And that's stuckness. That's overwhelm. All of that freeze response. I love working with the freeze response because I feel like I got it down. I've lived in the freeze response for so freaking long. And I'm just like, I know what to do with this. This is easy now. And it still happens. I just know what to do, which is really nice. So, underneath, and this is where we get into like the explanation of how I see trauma, is just overwhelming event. Overwhelming.
That's right.
System is like, I can't. So, when we say, but I can't. Like if someone asks you, or I have to, I should.
Mm-hmm.
Again, those words, trauma response. That's
Yeah.
what's happening. And so when we're overwhelmed like that and we feel that freeze, underneath that freeze, there's a lot of emotions. There is probably sadness or grief or anger, rage, all these different emotions. And there's also the energy and the sensation of fighting and fleeing. That's all trapped underneath this freeze. And that's why now, when we're actually not in danger, our body is protecting us, making us not unfreeze. Because if we unfreeze, guess what? We access all of this energy, all of these emotions. And it's like, what do I do with this? Because our body then thinks that we're right at that gunpoint. That's how it feels. It's the same experience. So yeah, when she told me that, I was like, okay, I'm a good student. I'm going to go try. So I did. I actually sat on my couch and I closed my eyes and I just sat and I was like, wow, there's a whole world underneath my head.
Yeah. Because that's feeling your emotions for the first time. And it's such an uncomfortable process. And so most people would not really do that. They would try to suppress their emotions in whichever way, shape, or form, whether it's through addiction or retail therapy or, I don't know, an eating disorder, either eating, under eating, overeating, gambling, tranquilizers. You know, it's easier to reach for something. Scrolling on the phone. And I've recently encountered that thoughts and intellects can also be an addiction used to suppress emotion by overthinking and justifying the behavior when triggered. So,
totally.
Yeah.
I used to do that, and I still catch myself when I go in circles in my head, how I stop it. And that's the anxiety part, going in circles in my head. But why? Where do I go? How do I solve it? Da, da, da. And my therapist, my somatic therapist, calls it you're getting chased by a lion. Like in that moment, you are chased by a lion. So we have all these funny things. So I'm like, if I tell her like, I don't have a sex drive lately, she's like, well, you don't really want to have sex when you're getting chased by a lion, you know? Like, you want to run from the lion because like that's a little more urgent. And I'm like, oh yeah, thanks for the reminder. It's so helpful to get that, you know.
It's true. It's true.
It's so true. And then you're like, wait, I'm not getting chased by a lion, but I feel like I'm getting chased by a lion. So yes, overthinking, so huge. Yeah. And it makes sense because, again, when we have these feelings and sensations, so feeling, you know, sad or feeling really angry or feeling helpless, sensation, feeling constriction, feeling tension, feeling like you have 20,000 pounds of bricks on your shoulders, feeling heaviness, feeling cold, warm, feeling tingling, all these different things.
Yeah.
Our body and our brain, especially our brain, is so convinced that we are in that scary, scary, scary moment. So part of the somatic work is actually to just dip into the sensations and emotions in a safe space. So suddenly we start from safety, and it's so important for me to with clients, like we always start from safety. So I'll have them either imagine that they're in a safe space. I will have them take a million pillows and blankets and all these things so that they can completely soften their body. Yeah. Because when we hold, we can't even feel what's happening in our body. You know, that like that. Like so many of us literally live like that. And I know I did. I mean, I was an overeater also, like, and it's so funny because I was overeating on healthy food. And everything out there was like, when you're eating junk food at night. And I'm like, but I'm not. I'm eating healthy food, but I eat like 5 portions because I don't want to feel anything. I don't. And actually that year when I started to just sit with my body, that year, randomly, I was like, oh, I don't feel like overeating anymore. Like I just realized like, I don't do that anymore. I stopped doing that. Wow, that's so cool, you know?
Yeah.
So it just automatically falls away because we're able to just sit with ourselves. So I
Right.
started with sensation because emotion for me was way too intimidating to feel. So I started with sensation.
Yeah. So this was for yourself, with your coach, or right?
Yes, actually with myself a lot because it was group coaching. So it wasn't like one-on-one. So
Yeah.
I would and I had then also a one-on-one coach who was a medium. This was so crazy. She was a medium. And the first time I talked to her, she was like, oh, okay, so your business is a trauma response.
I love mediums. I love that.
I can't talk. I'm done. What? It was like, how did this woman read me in like 30 minutes? It was so crazy. And I never I never understood that, but it was so true. So, but now I have a somatic therapist and a somatic coach because right now at this moment, but
Yes.
I've worked with somatic experiencing therapists for many years now. And we definitely started with sensation because that was easier for me. For some people, it could be emotion, but it depends on your journey. But basically, the process, kind of in a nutshell, which is hard.
because that's what I'm wondering. Like, if a client comes and obviously somatic coaching or somatic therapy is the chosen intervention, what can you expect?
So I think everyone does it differently. I'm sure of that because it's such an intuitive, I would honestly say it's an art. And it's an art of, I think the biggest thing that I do as a coach is work on myself to be clear for my clients and feel them. Like my intuition, I'm feeling with them and they lead me. I always tell them, you're leading me, you're guiding me. I'm just here. You're telling me what to do, basically. So I kind of reflect things, but it's essentially, I feel like I take their hand and they're kind of leading me through their nervous system. So how I work personally is, first of all, someone comes to me, we do not go to the body right away unless they've done a lot of that kind of work. So I kind of assess like where they're at. And I've made mistakes before. So it's definitely like a trial and error thing because I'm kind of assessing where they're at. I've had clients that are just not ready to go into the body because again, that's where all the trauma is and they haven't worked through much of it. So we talk and we see like, what are they struggling with? And I really closely pay attention to their body language and how they're sitting and how they're breathing. And if they're swallowing a lot, that's emotion being swallowed. If they're yawning, that's overwhelm of the nervous system. If they're dissociated, like if their jaw is tight, that's anger. Like all these different things.
Yes.
I'm just paying attention to their body and to them. And I'm also asking them, how does that feel? How do you feel? Where are you at? And I also ask them, what do you feel? And I see their vocabulary around it. Some people are like, I don't know. A lot of people, I have no idea. And I'm like, it's okay. We don't always know.
It's true. And that's a big problem, though, that I find is that when it comes to emotions and when it comes to feelings, not everyone has the vocabulary to express exactly what they feel. I'm one of them.
Yeah, I'm so curious if you can, just think about how does that relate to traumas that you've been through? Because for me, it's sadness. Sadness feels so heavy and it's, my mom couldn't deal with sadness. So there you go. Both my parents. My dad was always like, I'm good. Everything's good. I'm like, okay. So there's the emotion, but also I ask them, what do you notice in your body? What do you notice in your chest right now? What do you notice in your throat right now? What color is it? What shape? Is it moving? Is it still? So it's very kind of intuitive. Some people, again, are like, I notice nothing. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know. And some people are like, it's blue, it has wings. I'm like, okay, all right, cool. It really depends. And there's nothing, it's not like something's better than the other because I spent years again living in my head. So I get it. And There's no judgment. It's just like and I always remind them, no judgment. We're studying, we're literally taking a course on your body and your nervous system together right now. So then as we move through it, I definitely introduce self-compassion. Self-compassion is a huge part of my practice because when we are compassionate and we don't judge something, we're able to clearly see it. It's almost like I imagine there's a thing, it's like all jumbled up and it's covered in a black blanket, and then you just remove the blanket. That's compassion. You remove the blanket and then you're like, oh, let me just see this. Let me get curious. So then we look at the thing. And so I bring that back. And when there's shame, when there is, shame is so big in trauma. It's like, I'm alone and no one can see this and it's a secret and no one can know. That's really big. And I think that's why coaching is so amazing, because it's like there's another person with you. And I always tell them, I felt that last week, because they're like, no one feels this. And what's wrong with me? And I'm like, I felt it last week. It's such a relief, because in trauma, we feel so isolated. And you know what? Even in social media, I was talking about this with a friend recently. Even in social media, when someone's like, I'm depressed, and even when they're like crying, it still looks really pretty because it's like, it's on a screen and you don't actually feel like what they're feeling, and what they're feeling is like, it's really much uglier than what you're seeing on the screen.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of shame and isolation and trauma, and that's why coaching is beautiful. So self-compassion is really big. And I have certain practices and things that I introduced through the self-compassion workbook, which I really, really love. It's actually a whole course from UCSD, where I went to school, about self-compassion. And there's a lot of research behind it.
Yes.
And so I love that. Self-compassion is big. And then the somatic process itself is basically, I kind of go through the triggers that they're having in their life right now. So how was your week? Oh, this and this happened. Because whatever happened, whatever like stuckness or whatever moment where they felt something a little bit more intense, that is basically a doorway. It's a doorway into the past. So we walk through that doorway instead of being, and of course you can say, what does it remind you of? And some people can say, oh, when I was 2 or when I was 5 or whatever, but some people can't, and that's what's so cool about somatic work is you don't have to know.
Right.
You don't have to know the story. It's in your body. It's in your subconscious, which lives in your body. So,
and so you really connect the mind and the body. Yeah.
So maybe someone's like, I don't know, I had a fight with a coworker and it was so difficult. And I also introduce a lot of vocabulary. So by this point, they start to say, and I was in freeze, I was in dorsal, which is dorsal of your nervous system is where you're in freeze. And so people start to notice, which is really cool. Just noticing I was in freeze, I was frozen. I felt like I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It was not the usual me, or I was super anxious and fearful. And also the words, like you said, connecting that, what it sounds like. So when you're in dorsal, it sounds like I'm so helpless. There's nothing I can do, that kind of feeling. And when you're in anxiety, it sounds like, oh my God, nothing's working out. That kind of thing. And it's there's a lot more energy behind that, the sympathetic state of our nervous system. So, we have 3 different states. We have the dorsal, the sympathetic, and the ventral. And the ventral is when you're calm and present, and it sounds very different. It's like, oh, something happened, but I can do something about it. It's okay. So,
and that is really what we're aspiring to when we talk about somatic coaching, is we want to get to that last state.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Because we're always, yes, in a way, but we're always going to have the other 2. So like a lot of people ask me, what does it mean when my nervous system is regulated? And they think that it means that they are in ventral all the time. But in reality, it doesn't. because if you cannot be in ventral all the time. So what it means is that you simply spend less time in the other two. You're able to come back to yourself, which is your home. Your ventral is your home,
right,
more quickly. You're just able to come back more quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I love that question, because people are like, but I still have shutdown. I'm like, it's okay. We're human beings. Like, things are going to happen. Our nervous system responds. It's so normal. It's like part of survival, something happens. We have a response. Then what do we do with that response? If I still get anxious, I used to take it out on other people and just be like, it's because they're like this and like this. But now I'm like, oh, I'm feeling really scared, even though there's no lion. I'm still feeling really scared. I'm feeling really angry or whatever. This is not the time for conversations. This is not the time for rational thinking, because I'm not in my rational mind. My prefrontal cortex which is our rational, part, like shut down. It's offline. So I'm not going to make sense. And that's okay. So I don't have those rational conversations. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're taking this trigger of whatever happened. We're starting with safety. So we're starting with finding a place in our body that feels really good and just calm, and focusing our attention on it, or noticing something calming in the room, perhaps holding it in our hand and really feeling it in our body, not just thinking about it. Oh, this is a pretty object, really nice. It's like, really, like, where do you feel that? Oh, I feel my chest just feels so warm and expansive. And, so I'm always bringing them back to the emotions and sensations. And then we go to that trigger. Okay. So now just remembering what happened, who was in the room, how was it? And again, I'm studying them. So if I feel like we're going into the trigger and they go to really intense shutdown, or they go to, dissociation, we come back to the safety. So our nervous system, again, does this automatically. Yes. As we just talked about, right? It just goes into, it's like dorsal, sympathetic, ventral. It does this automatically. But for people with a lot of trauma, it does it really slow, and it just gets stuck in that dorsal. It gets stuck in that sympathetic. So we're kind of relearning, teaching our nervous system to do it more smoothly. Just have that pendulum swing until we get to the balance state.
So there's almost this awareness, so that this person can and understand their body, their emotions, and their mind, and link the three together.
Yes, right? I love that you said link, because in trauma we dissociate.
Yes,
our mind floats away. We don't want to be in the body because it's too much, and that's why somatic work is so beautiful, because you're unifying. You're coming back to wholeness. We're whole. We're not just our mind. We're not just our body. We're all the things, and our soul. We're all these things. So, and I also think somatic work is so spiritual, because you just start to feel so connected to yourself, and you feel your energy. Like it's really energy work in a way. And it comes from, Peter Levine, the founder of somatic experiencing, worked with shamans. So it all makes sense that he bringing this from ancient traditions, and today, Native American wisdom, and all these amazing, it's just amazing.
I love it. I love it. Do you have any success stories that you want to share with us? Like so many.
Like people finally feeling like they don't have to people please, and they can speak their truth, and people feeling lighter, and just feeling like they can go through the day and be connected and be present. People feeling their inner child. Like, I had a client who could never connect to her inner child. It was like, I don't know. I don't know who that is. I have no compassion. And this level of compassion that's rising. And, this person in her work was very, very, very triggered, and would go to work and would dissociate like every time. And then suddenly she's connecting with her coworkers and her boss and having fun and like there and present.
Wow.
It's like the same situation, but a whole new me, we don't change our situation, but it's just so cool.
That is totally cool.
Yes.
For people that want to reach out, where can we find you? On your website, social media?
Yeah, so the easiest place is Instagram at marina.y.t. And my website is marinayt.com.
Okay.
Easy.
Perfect. Any last words of wisdom for the listeners, Marina?
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is I have a free download that you can grab at the link in my Instagram bio that has 7 embodiment practices. Yeah, I've gotten really good feedback about it. So go check it out. The wisdom is that your body is the wisdom, and like whatever, it's like such a journey, but your body always knows when you're ready to work on something, and sometimes you're not ready, and you have to just trust all the memories, all the ideas, all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the sensations. It's really a process of like trusting everything, which you develop capacity for trust over time because trust is really shaken up by trauma. So over time, you'll start to trust and be like, okay, I get why yesterday I was so crazy, or I get why yesterday I was so shut down, or whatever it is. Like, it is what it is.
Absolute wise words. Thank you so much, Marina. You have a great rest of your day.
You too.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.